Hello, everyone, and welcome to OST Live, a weekly broadcast on blockchain, branded tokens, and token economies. And we feature weekly guests on this show to discuss the latest in blockchain and the current projects that they are working on. And with us today, we have Mark Bonchek. He is the founder and CEO of Shift Thinking, and he's also an advisor to OST. So without further ado, Mark, thank you for joining us on OST Live.
Jose, it's great to be here. I'm a big fan of Simple Token and love what you're doing here with OST Live. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm definitely glad to have you, on here as well, and sort of introduce you to the community. So maybe we can start off with your background. You're a contributor to the Harvard Business Review. You've published a couple articles on branded currencies, and you're also part of Singularity University. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, well, I kind of got onto the internet early. So I happened to be working on my PhD in the early 90s, looking at the topic was political economy. And then I got onto the internet early and kind of had this epiphany that it was going to change everything. And I was in a position to really take time to look at what those changes were going to be, and ended up writing my dissertation really about social media before it was social media. And the fundamental premise there was seeing how networks were going to change everything. And that's what I've been at work on ever since, is really working with leaders and organizations to understand not only what to do differently, but how to think differently. And what does the shift from a kind of hierarchical model of engagement and business to a networked model mean? And that's why I'm so excited about blockchain and what OST is doing as well, is because I think it's kind of the next evolution of the transformation that's wrought by the internet and digital technology.
Great. So is that sort of the shift mindset to move away from hierarchy and start thinking more about networks?
Yeah, and it's fundamentally, if you go back and look at kind of the equivalent to what the internet has done, you have to go back to Gutenberg. So the Gutenberg revolution was a move in communication from one to one to one to many, that you could broadcast information out to a large audience at scale. The internet revolution is moving from one to many to many to many. That's the networked aspect. And what it enables is these network effects that can drive exponential change. And so getting our head around even more than just hierarchy to network, it's really about one to many to many to many. That's the big shift in thinking. And that has ripple effects through everything from how we communicate, to how we organize, to the way that we transact, the future of the banking system, the financial system. And ultimately, it will be just as the corporation, the nation state, and bureaucracy came about because of Gutenberg, there's a whole new class of institutions that are going to be coming about as a result of digital technology. And blockchain is kind of the last key enabler to make that possible.
Great, and you've been involved early with the internet, and you're also involved with blockchain. So I guess we'll start the conversation with comparing blockchain to internet in the 1990s. Maybe you can tell us about some relevancies you see between the internet and blockchain.
Yeah, there are a couple of different layers to that. So there's kind of an internet, and the very beginning was really about kind of democratizing information and disintermediating the gatekeepers that controlled information. If you think about what a web page or a blog could do. And then the second phase of the internet was kind of social networking and really enabling things to happen at scale. But it really was still about kind of information and communication. And blockchain has the parallel because it's doing to trust what the early internet did to information. It's democratizing trust. It's disintermediating the gatekeepers that have controlled trust, and bringing a network effect so that it could be at scale. So there's just kind of a parallel between a fundamental shift in an aspect of the way that we work. And then there's also a parallel in terms of the evolution. So if you look at the early days of the internet, there was a sense that people kind of didn't take it seriously, or they thought that it was just going to be something on the side. What most people don't know is that the company that built Target's first e-commerce platform was Amazon. because Target didn't think that it was critical to their business. And it was like, oh, well, here's this tech company, so fine, you do that. And it cost them millions of dollars to get out of that contract. And we're seeing it the same way here, is there's kind of a, people aren't taking things seriously because it's early, but that's the nature of exponential change. They're kind of deceptively slow in the beginning and then overwhelmingly fast once they pick up steam. And so that's really where we are, and kind of we're in that deceptive phase where there's initial hype, then it kind of, you know, dissipates a bit. So people think not to take it seriously. And that's just the time when you need to be doubling down.
So do you believe we're sort of in the dot-com boom of the 90s, except in 2018 with blockchain?
Yeah, we're kind of that like post-crash phase. Like if you look at, you know, look at Amazon stock price, like big boom and then crash and then low for a while. And it's that kind of post-crash phase when the companies that kept going on their digital internet strategies are the ones that really have succeeded. And the ones that were kind of like, well, you know, we don't have to worry about it. It's the blockbusters, right? Versus the Netflix. I think we're right in that kind of valley after the initial hype crash, but before the real fundamental transformation.
Great. I definitely agree with you. It's definitely the time to double down and stay focused on building, the next generation technology. But you mentioned that the blockchain democratizes trust, and I think that fits in with today's topic of loyalty programs and branded currencies, because there's trust involved between a brand and a user. And that's why there's loyalty. So maybe we can dive into current loyalty programs today that are not on the blockchain. So you've written a couple articles on branded currencies. So what are some of the takes that you got from researching currencies?
Well, there are two things to look at. First is to understand that kind of ironically, today's loyalty programs have nothing to do with loyalty. They're actually incentive programs. Because if you think about loyalty, the meaning of the word is if I'm loyal to you, I do things even when it's not in my self-interest. That's kind of the nature of loyalty, right? Like I'm loyal, and therefore even if you do something I don't like I'm still loyal. And loyalty programs today with brands are really transactional. It's like, look, you do this and I'll give you this. And so it's actually just another form of transaction, just not in a kind of typical payment model. So the irony is that there's very low trust in loyalty programs today. And people don't even have a lot of trust that like my points will still be worth something in the future for those kinds of points-based programs. So we actually need to put a lot more trust back into loyalty programs, and we need to change a new kind of relationship that's not just transactional, but is based on more collaboration, co-creation, contribution. You know, if I do something, if I'm posting regularly on behalf of a brand, how am I rewarded for the ways in which I influence others? If I'm an influencer and not just a buyer, there aren't really good ways for brands to reward those influencers without it feeling like a payoff. And that to me is the real power of what blockchain is going to be able to enable, are the creation of a much richer set of interactions between and among customers, influencers, and brands. And to understand the nature of that, we have to look at the nature of currency. And so when we talk about branded currencies, you have to understand that the way that people interact is in two different modes, if you will. And the anthropologists will call it a market economy and a gift economy, or a transaction economy and a relationship economy. So as an example, like if you're moving, let's say you're moving apartments or houses, like if you have friends help you move, you don't pay them money, right? You get them pizza and beer, you do nice things for them, but it's not like they walk in the door and you hand them a check. That would be kind of weird, right? Similarly, like if you hire professional movers, you got to pay them money. You can't just serve them pizza and beer. And those are the two differences. Is sometimes we do things because there's a relationship there, and sometimes we do things because there's a transaction there. Financial currencies have been useful for transactions. And what we're moving towards is a world where we can interact with these social currencies. And what blockchain is going to enable us to do is to reinforce these social currencies so that you can reward and incentivize people for what they do for the relationship. It's like if someone goes and gets coffee for the office, like what do you do for them? How do you kind of say thank you in a way that's really about gratitude and not just a payment? And that at a high level to me is why I'm excited about Simple Token as a platform, blockchain as an enabler of loyalty, is not just to execute like the allocation of points like a transaction, but actually the creation of these micro economies in which there are both transactional and social currencies.
Great. So going back to loyalty points for a minute, is compared to a social currency, which can also be a branded currency, is the value perceived, like say from a user, is it different from a loyalty, or I guess it is different, but how is it different from a loyalty program than a social currency? How's the value that they perceive? How's it different from one
Yeah.
another?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the thing that's really hard for people I find is that, when we're looking at something new, we see the new through the lens of the old. Like when the automobile came in, it wasn't an automobile, it was a horseless carriage. Because all we could imagine is, well, it's like a horse-drawn carriage, but without a horse. And that's the way we're looking at things today, particularly with blockchain, is we're just looking at what is it from what we already do that would be done differently. And it's really about what's made possible that never existed before. That's where the real value gets created. And we saw that with the internet. The first websites were just online brochures because that's the only model we had. So if we look at loyalty programs, this is not about taking your existing points program and putting it on the blockchain. I mean, that'll happen, but that's like not really the point. The point is what are the ways you can create these new kind of interactions? So to your point about how are those two things different, I look at like Starbucks has been very clear, like Howard Schultz, the founder, has said that branded currency is going to redefine loyalty and redefine branded relationships. And he believes that the companies that become the centers of these microeconomies are the ones that will win in each industry. And yet, if you look at how Starbucks is doing things today, like it's very transactional. If I want to say thank you for doing something for me, I can send you an e-gift card that you deposit into your Starbucks loyalty account that you then use that money to buy something. But it kind of takes the whole relationship out of things. It's just like, well, thanks for the money. As opposed to being able to say, hey, let me buy you a cup of coffee. And you just walk into Starbucks and you're just like, here's a coffee on Jose. Awesome. As opposed to here's $5 from Jose to buy a cup of coffee. You see how it, like, even though it might be the same amount of money, it just feels completely different to be Jose bought you a cup of coffee and Jose gave you $5. And so it's really that world of the Jose bought you a cup of coffee that we're really moving into with this branded currency.
So would you say that's one of the largest challenges for businesses to sort of build that social currency concept with a customer, like that, the coffee example? Like, do you think that's one of the biggest challenges right now for business?
Kind of gestures, we aren't comfortable doing it. And what I find is when I talk to a lot of marketing teams and leaders, and once they get this concept, like in the beginning, they're kind of like, I just don't get it. And then once they get this concept, like the light bulb goes on and they say like, this is something we've been trying to do for years and we just haven't known how to do it. So as an example, like with marketing teams, they know now that influence is very much about word of mouth and what happens from influencers. It's not what the brand says, it's what people say about their brand or about their product. And the challenge has been, like, if a blogger writes something about you, how do you kind of say thank you? Like, if you pay them money, then it's like conflict of interest. It's not really, ethical, and they have to disclose it, and they don't want to feel like they're doing it for the money. But they also want to be rewarded, like they have to kind of grow their business. And so what they're looking at here is that as you expand the range of what these currencies can be, I might not send you money, but could I send you, if I'm creating my own currency, can I send you, like we've been joking about, like it's Starbucks points, they call them stars. Like, well, here's 100 stars out of appreciation. That doesn't feel like a payment, even though those stars are things that I might be able to use to buy things. And so it's creating this kind of intermediated state that's part social currency and part financial currency. So it doesn't feel like a payment, and yet it has real value. And that's the kind of chasm in the middle that brands haven't been able to manage before. And so what gets them really excited is this idea of, gee, I really could say kind of thank you and express a appreciation to a blogger for recognizing the brand and doing something without it feeling like a payoff and without them feeling like they've kind of somehow jeopardized their independence and autonomy. And things like that are where people get really excited.
Great. So it's almost like finding that Goldilocks zone, where it's the right balance between a transaction and something that's a social currency.
Yeah, exactly. So let me give you an example in the moving example. So like if you're helping me move, and granted, so I'll give you the pizza and beer, right, when you're there. But let's say, you kind of drove an hour to help me move. If I said like, it's not a really approach to be like, here's $40 for helping me move. That feels a little weird. But here's $40 for gas since you drove for an hour. That's okay, right? That would be like, oh, thanks. I appreciate you recognizing the extra effort. If you said, well, actually, it was $50 for gas, so kind of you owe me another 10, then it's kind of not really cool again. Now, let's say that gas company had a program to be kind of like, here's a way to help reimburse people for gas money. Instead of like giving them money like a gift card, that would feel a little weird. But if there's a branded currency around this, which is kind of this, gas coin, and it's like, hey, I really appreciate you driving, that distance. I put 40 gas coins in your account. Oh, awesome. Thanks. So that's where that kind of Goldilocks is, where you're getting something that has value, but it's reinforcing and strengthening the trust in the relationship as opposed to turning it into a transactional relationship.
Great. So that would be the advice for businesses that either have a loyalty program today or are thinking about building one, is to think about adding a social currency aspect to your program, and it's something that a branded currency might be used to do that. So talking about blockchain and crypto, it's currently been in a downturn, and it's an early technology, so it's a bit shaky. So what's your opinion, or what's your take on major companies, accepting and looking into crypto for the long-term benefits that it might have? So where do you see this going as far as companies that are looking to implement blockchain tokens, even though it's still a very, very early stage technology?
Yeah, well, I kind of put it into a few different categories. There are some who still think of blockchain and crypto in the kind of financial currency model, in a payment context. And that's where most of the attention has been, is like, well, should we accept Bitcoin as payment? And we don't want to do that. That's a very narrow view of blockchain. Then there's some who are looking more at, blockchain and crypto more as what it enables, and getting interested around smart contracts and really understanding that this is a system of distributed trust. And then they're looking at their industries to say, where can we kind of rethink trust and loyalty? And so that's really about new ways of engaging customers, new business models. Those, I would say, are the more advanced companies that are looking at what the technology is going to enable in the creation of something new, and not just where it's going to kind of automate or replace something that's existing. And I can tell you, in working with companies, there are a lot of companies that are thinking and working on this very seriously and very intelligently. And in almost every case, they're not talking about it, because they don't want to tip off their competitors. And so it's really easy if you're a company that's kind of looking around saying, well, I don't see anyone else working on it. You're missing the boat, because your best competitors, your toughest competitors are working on it. They're just not talking about it.
Great. So branded currencies should be more than just a better version of a loyalty program, right? It shouldn't be the same thing all over. You should businesses should think about sort of things like that Goldilocks zone when either rebranding or creating a token based loyalty program.
Yeah, and I would really elevate it. I mean, I think that the loyalty program is a piece of this, but really the way to think about this is that historically we've thought about companies as operating in the economy. And the way to think about this is really companies operating as an economy, that companies are going to be microeconomies. If you look at it, you've got digital platforms that enable you to create your own marketplace. You've got social networks that enable you to create your own community. And now with the blockchain and crypto, you can create your own currency. And with smart contracts, you'll be able to create your own governance. Well, my PhD was about social media, but it was formally in political economy. And I can tell you that if you go to an academic, go to your local university and say, like, okay, if you can create your own markets, your own community with your own currency and your own governance model, they will tell you that you're your own political economy. So this is really like companies are the next nation state in effect. You need to think about your business, not just as selling a product into an economy, but as a microeconomy. And therefore, it will not just be in a loyalty program. The top companies are going to have their own currencies. I mean, look at Amazon. If you think it is only a matter of time and not very long until everything is just going to be done with Amazon points. Amazon will have its own currency. It's really close to that now. You've got your Prime program and you've got your Amazon credit card and you're paying with points. There's a whole ecosystem. They're going to flip that switch. And Starbucks is going to flip their switch where it's all going to be an ecosystem with their currency. And so you got to decide, are you going to have your currency or are you going to be using someone else's currency? And the irony of this is that it's actually going back to we're going forward into the past, because banks used to issue their own banknotes. Companies used to issue their own notes. Before central banking, this is how it worked. So we've been here before and we're going to do it again, but at a whole different scale.
Great. So there's been a lot of talks around what will be the major use case, or what will be a use case that sort of brings blockchain to the mainstream. And you mentioned that you see microeconomies, you see businesses creating their own economy. Do you think that will be sort of the use case of blockchain, it being creating an economy for a business or a company? Do you see that as sort of the major use case that can bring blockchain to the mainstream?
Yeah, I think where it's likely to start, well, you can actually see where it already has started, is I always say, look at it through the lens of trust. So where is it first that there's a trust gap will be the first use case. And then it will be, where can we add trust into the system to create value? Like the first use cases where it's really solving immediate problems are, if you look, for example, in the supply chains generally, but like the supply chain for food, that's been one of the first ones right out of the gate, because how can I trust that and know where the food came from, and if there's a problem, how to show what field it came from if there's a case of food poisoning somewhere on the other side of the country. So the trusted passing along of the information of origin. So in that case, kind of origin is really good for the blockchain, of knowing where something came from. So that's an existing use case. And then we're going to gradually see that, the distribution around kind of assets, and how do I know what ownership is, and whether it's intellectual property or verifying things. There's a whole verification aspect that's going to be use case. And then I think we're going to start to move into, this is where like the loyalty comes in, is, what can I create? Where can I create trust? Where can I create relationship? There also will be an aspect for big existing loyalty programs, which is more on the trust and verification of like, hey, how do I know that you're not going to water down my loyalty points or get rid of them? How can I trust what the value of those points are? There's also going to be a portability. I think we're going to see a big market between loyalty programs. So for example, if I can put on the blockchain all of my travel, imagine that TripIt went to the blockchain. And so I can verify these are the hotel nights I stayed, these are the trips that I took, this is how many miles I fly. Then I can actually go to an airline and say, look, I'm a 100K traveler. Will you give me platinum status? Right now, there's no way for me to verifiably attest to all of those trips, but a blockchain world enables me to do that. So we're going to see a flip as well where consumers will be able to establish proof of their value to a brand, and we'll see that as well. I think that'll be a big use case of like, hey, we want to reward you, come over to us, and we'll give you a way to verify that.
Great, and we're seeing a lot of big brands starting to look into this, and hopefully, over the next coming years, we'll see those use cases coming out. But as an advisor to OST, I wanted to hear your opinion on, why you believe OST is uniquely positioned to make this happen for these big companies with millions of users.
Well, the reason why I got excited about OST when I first kind of read about what Jason and the team were up to and actually reached out to them was, I could see where things were going and what the need was. But I didn't really appreciate at the time. I had written about branded currency in my HBR column, but I hadn't really appreciated like what blockchain would enable and how quickly it would enable it. So that's where I got excited. And, I think that what's so powerful about the OST model is understanding the need for a platform that will enable people and empower people to create their own currencies and microeconomies. And when I think about what the kind of analogy to that is really looking at the early days of cloud computing and the role of software and what Salesforce.com did. There it really was about, Mark Benioff and the team's insight to say, hey, moving this into the cloud is going to enable customer relationship management, not just as software, but as the relationship with customers to go to a whole new level. And so they really started creating these tools that enabled people to design and create their own CRM systems. To me, OST is the equivalent of Salesforce.com for these microeconomies and branded currencies. Is here are the tools that you need so that you can begin to manage your relationships and your business as a microeconomy. And appreciating that like companies don't want to do all of that themselves. They don't want to manage all of this stuff with the blockchain themselves. There's just no reason to do that. Let someone else build the platform, use that platform so you can focus on your unique way of creating value and engaging the customer. And that's where we're seeing value generally. And, I don't see anyone else that understands it as well as OST, nor that is executing as effectively to build the systems and work backward from the future need state.
Great, and I think you hit the nail on the head, and we're very grateful and thankful to have you as an advisor. But yeah, that's OST's mission to let these companies focus on, if you're a business, focus on your product. You shouldn't be turning your product-based company into a blockchain-based company just to figure out how to implement a token economy. But moving on to sort of ending where we sort of started today's discussion about comparing blockchain to the internet, I wanted to hear your take on what do you think we will see, like what's next for blockchain, like as far as where the internet is today. When do you think blockchain will be there? We're only about like 25 years since the internet, the early days of the internet. So as far as timeline, when do you think we'll see these major use cases in adoption of blockchain?
Well, I think generally we're on exponential curves. I mean, that's all of my work with Singularity University is all about understanding the nature of exponential change, because our minds are oriented toward things being linear and incremental. And the nature of many-to-many network technology is that it's exponential and accelerating rate of change. So we look a lot at how we think things are going to move at a 10% rate and they end up moving at a 10x rate. So, like you said, if the internet was 25 years to kind of revolutionize information, Gutenberg's press was 250 years. So there's a 10x, 250 to 25. I think that as the next generation of this digital revolution, blockchain will be 10 times faster than the internet. And having seen the pace of change with the internet and now the pace of change with blockchain, I think it's on a 10x path. So I think it's actually about 2.5 years. If I had to say, maybe it's 3 to 4, but I would say on a 10x rate, it's like you got 2.5 years. And I would say that in about probably 18 to 24 months, you're going to start to see these use cases come out that are like, mind blowing. And it took longer with the internet for people to realize them. And now that we're activated to disruption and exponential change, we're going to recognize it much sooner. And then everyone's going to be scrambling to keep up. So it is not another 25 years. I really believe it's kind of like you got 2 to 3 years and you better start now.
Great. And, talking about those, first of all, it's very exciting to be part of this and experience this. And I'm sure it's very exciting for you as well to sort of experience the internet days and now experience what's happening now with blockchain. But something I want to mention with those use cases, last week we had Mick Hagan, CEO of Mainframe, and he sort of compared that early in the internet days, people were thinking about the newspaper and hyperlinks on the internet. They didn't really think about what it would become. And I think that's just an exciting thought to, like, today we don't even know what's yet to come with the use of blockchain.
No, absolutely. And, the specifics are really hard to know, but, the big picture you can foresee. I mean, I know this from having looked at the internet early on. And while I certainly didn't get any of the details right, the big picture really consistently, like you could see disintermediation, you could see the nature of networking, you could see the ways in which consumers would have more power, you could see the way that these relationships would become more collaborative and co-creative, and the rise of community. Like, you can go look at my PhD, 1997, like you could see all of that. And the big picture of blockchain is really clear. It's all about new kinds of institutions that enable trust to be established without third-party intermediaries. It's all about the exchange of these social currencies that enable microeconomies and redefine loyalty and redefine relationships. All of this stuff is, the big picture is clear. And I like to say, like, you have to be willing to set off for in a direction without a clear destination. You got to kind of get on the road and start the road trip without knowing exactly where you're going to sleep that night, and you'll find the hotel later. And too often we wait until we know where we're going to sleep that night before we set out on the road. And you just got to start and accelerate that learning curve, because the big picture of this is actually quite clear.
Definitely. And like you said, you'll definitely learn along the way. There's definitely going to be big changes as well. And we'll learn that along the way. But I think it's been a great interview. And for those of you that are watching this live, thank you so much for joining us. And if you thought today's discussion was interesting and you're interested in what OST provides, you can head over to OST.com. We have the toolkits available for individuals to be able to manage their own, create and manage their own token economy. And we have we have alpha challenges, which over 192 proof of concepts were created by developers with just a variety of different use cases that you can implement a token economy. But this was a great introduction to branded currencies from the beginning of comparing the internet to blockchain. And Mark, thank you so much for joining us on OST Live.
Thank you, Jose. It's been great.
And for everybody, we'll see you guys next time. Stay tuned. We have weekly episodes. We'll have the recap of this episode on our Medium post posted later today. Thank you. We'll see you guys next time.